and welcome back to Paranormal NL Podcast. That's PNL Podcast for short. I'm your host and founder, Jen Noseworthy. I've got a special guest from Australia waiting backstage who I'll bring on shortly. Now listen in to Paranormal NL Podcast on UPRN on Tuesdays at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This is a pre-recorded show broadcasting on UPRN, United Public Radio Network, 107.7 FM, New Orleans, and 105.3 FM, Gulf Coast. PNL Podcast is sponsored by the BOG team, a boots-on-the-ground team doing paranormal investigations in Newfoundland and Labrador, Canada. PNL Podcast believes in international paranormal networking and highlighting paranormal people, places, and things around the globe. Contact me, your host, Jen, at paranormal.nl.podcast@gmail.com and follow PNL Podcast and the BOG team on the Linktree. Now, I have on with me all the way from Southeast Australia down under, I have Sarah Bignell, and she is with Yowie Central. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you very much. It's so lovely to be here with you.
Yes, thank you. And I know we were talking off air about the time zone, so it's early morning for you all there and late night here for us.
It sure is. It sure is.
So
it's a bit hard to get the time difference right, isn't it? It's a bit confusing, but we made it.
I know, right? I mean, we're so far away, but isn't it so cool that it's just like you're right next door here.
I
So
know.
tell me about yourself and Yowie Central.
Yowie Central is a podcast. Well, it actually started off on radio. It was a local radio show.
Okay.
And I was it's a volunteer radio station, and I started it off as a little radio show, and it was just about sharing my obsession with the whole Bigfoot hairy man kind of phenomena from around the world. And we have a Bigfoot, an Australian Bigfoot, that some people call a Yowie, some people call a Doolagal, some people call the big fella. And it started growing and growing and growing. And then at about, 18 months ago, I decided that the radio format was a bit restrictive. It's a bit short. So I was having these amazing conversations with people and having to edit and cut lots of stuff out. So
right?
Yeah, you'd have the same issue. So I just started doing the podcast as a podcast rather than a radio show. And it's now listened to in, I think last check was about 33 different countries around the world.
Hey,
and
awesome.
I'm up over, it's about 250,000-300,000 downloads in 5 years, which is really cool.
Congratulations.
Yeah. And so that's my main thing. I was for about 3.5 years the main Yowie witness interviewer for Australian Yowie Research, otherwise known as the Yowie Hunters. So for a few years there, I was interviewing full-time, pretty much every day, interviewing 2 or 3 people. So it's been
a lot of stories to tell us. Now, I know you had mentioned several different names for Yowie down in Australia, and do they all look the same, or is it just because in different parts of Australia they just use different names?
Well, because we have original Australians, so our First Nations people have many different languages all around the country. And so a bit like in the United States, there's lots of different names for this being that we call Bigfoot. So that's the main reason. There are at least 2, but we think 3 different species of the hairy fellas. So there's the big ones that are enormous, that look a bit like the Paddy from the Patterson-Gimlin footage. We've got those big guys. We've also got a slightly leaner, more maybe more human-looking, more Neanderthal-looking being that I've heard some people call the ancient ones, and I'm starting to understand that they're 2 different separate species. And we've got little fellas as well. We've got little short ones. Yeah.
Okay. Now, depending on the terrain, is that where you would see, for example, I know Australia is a huge place and you've got a lot of different geographical type of places. I mean, you've got desert, you've got mountain, I'm sure you've got swamp. So where do the little ones live?
In very similar areas to the big ones.
Okay.
We
Okay.
probably we get more reports up and down the southeastern seaboard where there's a long mountain range that runs from the very south. In fact, it runs all the way up the east coast of Australia. So there are a lot more reports along that mountain range than anywhere else. But we still do get reports from areas that are more cleared. For example, my farm, I live in an area that is farm country, and we still well, we've had them on my farm, so it's not jungle, it's not forest, it's pretty flat and quite open. So, I mean, there are state parks relatively nearby,
So they
but
can hide in the park, right? Because it's
yeah.
protected. Is there many poaching and stuff like that going on in the parks and that? Or do you think, might be what's driving them out into the residential areas more? Do you find that that's happening more?
Um, not necessarily, no. We've got huge national parks here where no hunting is allowed and no development, no economic, no knocking down forest to build houses or anything like that. We've got state forests where hunting is allowed, so deer hunting, pig hunting is allowed, um, and rabbit hunting and fox hunting. So there are areas where there are people out with guns, that might not be quite as safe as national parks, but we've got huge national parks. So I'm not necessarily finding an increase in reports of yowies coming into residential areas. They always have done. There's always, I mean, I've spoken to quite a few people who've seen them in areas where you'd think, how is that even possible? But from what I understand now and their ability to cloak themselves and make themselves invisible, they could be anywhere and we wouldn't know.
I 100% believe that they can do that. If an octopus can cloak himself and look exactly like his surroundings, why can't Bigfoot?
Yeah, exactly. I've interviewed people who've seen them disappear in front of their eyes. One guy I remember specifically saw it fade out from, left to right, just start fading, and then it was gone. It was a huge, huge yowie. So I absolutely believe they've got the ability to do that, and in which case, and lots of reports of people seeing bushes being parted, but there's no one there. There's nothing,
Okay,
trees being
right.
shaken, but they can't see anything doing the shaking. So I'm 100% convinced that they can do that, in which case they could be anywhere.
What do you think about the new technology that we got now, like with the LiDAR, the SLAM scans and stuff like that, like for footprints and things? Do you like that tech, or do you prefer the old school kind of plastering, and they have this new eDNA and things?
Yeah.
What's your take on that?
Well, I'm not a technology person in general. So and I, and to be honest, I was in, years past, I was out there searching for them, and I really wanted to find tracks and I really wanted to find evidence of them. But I've reached a point now that I'm not actively hunting them, as so to speak. I'm not so I don't really. I'm not really fussed technology wise. I've got an amazing thermal camera. It's the same type of thermal camera that my old team used to capture some remarkable thermal camera footage of two beings. This was a couple of years ago now. I've got the same camera. I hardly ever get it out. It sits in the cupboard.
Well, tell me
So,
about the footage that they
well,
captured. What
oh,
kind of footage was it?
amazing. I'll send you a link after this, but it's nighttime. They're in Springbrook National Park, which is a semi-tropical rainforest.
Okay.
And one of our team members, the lovely Buck Buckingham, he was using this camera. He'd never used the camera before. They're brand new cameras. He was trying to work out how to zoom, and he didn't realize he had to kind of stop recording in order to zoom, and he was messing around with the camera. He realizes that there's something on the camera. He can see something, but the image was actually quite small. So
Oh,
he couldn't really work out what was going on. So he was trying to zoom in and zoom out, and in the end was ending up pressing the button that was flicking through the different filters. You know how you've got white hot and
right.
black hot and iron and all of those different colored filters. What he ended up capturing was, looking on a big screen, you can see it. There are two beings who are hiding behind a large tree.
Oh,
They stand up and you can see their heads. We've been back to measure that site. I've actually been up to that site. They took me to there a few months later. These beings were at least 9 to 10 foot tall. And there are two of them. And one of them bends down to pick something up. And you can see the profile of a being that is not human. It's kind of gorilla Neanderthal shape. It's got more of a nose than a gorilla, but huge brow ridge. It's massive. And there's one sort of facing sort of to the camera, and the other one's facing the other way, watching his back. I'm assuming they're watching each other's back. But because it's thermal, it's not an infrared camera. I don't know if they realised that Buck was there filming them. They potentially did know he was there. But he managed to capture this remarkable footage. And
that's awesome.
it's so cool. I mean, there are people alleging that it's a hoax and that it's faked. It's not. I was on the phone to them that night and they were so excited.
Were they?
So excited. And when they sent me the footage, I almost fell off my chair. It was like, oh my God, wow. You got them really on film. It's really, really special footage.
Now, you had mentioned some of the other ones that are kind of thinner. Tell me about those kind.
So there are reports of slightly leaner beings that have more human-looking faces, and they're not quite as big and bulky. So my a friend of mine who's part of the Yowie Central team, just recently, a couple of months ago in October, was driving down a bush track. It's broad daylight, and her dog started going crazy. Her dog's a German Shepherd, very protective,
Okay.
beautiful dog, very intelligent. Her dog started getting really anxious and trying to climb into the front seat with her. And she's like, what the hell's going on here? And all of a sudden, comes around a bend, there's a huge Yowie, and he was big, maybe 8 to 9 foot tall, but lean. And she said he was really athletic, not big and hulking. He was huge, but not
Yeah.
the 12-foot enormous hulking being that's sometimes described.
And animals always know, don't they? They've got that sixth sense. So, what did she do?
So she stopped the car, and this being, because he was in the middle of crossing the road, he stopped, and she said, because he was sideways on, he turned his head, his shoulder, and then he swung the rest of his body around to stare straight at her. And I was like, oh my God, what did you do there? You must have almost crapped your dacks when you need new underwear after that. And she said, oh, I was shaking so much I couldn't get the car into reverse to kind of back away and then drive around him. I was shaking so much I couldn't move. She said, I felt like he looked directly into my soul, and she was watching him. They were just staring at each other for I don't know how long. It might have been a minute or so, which must have seemed like forever.
Well, my next question was going to be, a lot of people say that their eyes look human. Did she say anything about that, or?
Yeah, totally human. She said this didn't look like an ape at all. It was
Okay.
very human looking,
Sense the
very
intelligence kind of thing?
very handsome in an athletic way, and beautiful auburn coloured hair, big dark brown eyes staring straight at her. She said she couldn't see an expression on the face, but she could see dark grey skin. There was hair, but it wasn't completely hair covered. And it stood there staring at her until another car came up behind them. And as she and obviously this being could hear the car coming, he stepped off the road and disappeared into the bush.
Okay. Wow.
But he looked more human than ape-like.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what did her dog do? Did he freak out?
Well,
Or
so this is a bit that I didn't tell you. So while she's staring, and the dog by this stage is yelping and screaming. She said the dog was screaming, and all of a sudden, this Yowie opened his mouth a bit, and she felt a wave of calm and a wave of love.
Hmm.
So the dog instantly calms down. She suddenly feels, oh, I'm okay. I'm okay. It's safe. She manages to gather herself together enough to then, when he walked off the road she said, I was going to drive on. She said, then I thought I better check for tracks. And I was like, are you crazy? Just stay in the bloody car.
Did she get out?
Yes. I mean, she's a friend of mine. I was like, I've trained you really well, but there's no need to be crazy. So she stopped and got out of the car and had a look for tracks. This is before the other car came along. Oh, sorry, no, actually, the other car had come along and driven past, and then she got out of the car to check for tracks. She couldn't see anything, but she did say that she still could feel him there. He was still there watching her.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But what was interesting though, people often talk about, well, why didn't you get a photo? Why don't people ever take
how, I mean, when that's going on, you're not going to hold on a second. Let me reach in my purse. Yeah, no.
She was shaking. She was shaking. Her nervous system was in overdrive. She was shaking so much.
Fight or flight, yeah.
She could barely drive off, let alone get her camera out and take a photo.
Adrenaline rush and disbelief and shock, right? At that point. And, it's interesting how when he made both of them feel calm, even the dog stopped barking.
Yeah, totally calm. So whether that was infrasound, I mean, it's one of those theories that I'm sure you've heard of, that they use infrasound to cause various different effects in
just
humans.
like elephants do when they talk and feel it with their feet. The loud grumble, right? They use that with their feet.
That's right. So even though she couldn't hear any audible sound coming from its mouth, it potentially was emitting a sound that was such low frequency that she couldn't hear it. But on some level, her body and the dog's body were hearing it and reacting to whatever frequency it might have been emitting. And
that leads us, Sarah, into Yowie mind speak. Can you talk a little bit about that for the people who haven't heard about that or don't understand what it is?
So there are reports all around Australia now. I've interviewed quite a few people who've experienced it. I've experienced it myself now for the last couple of years. A lot of people in the States have also experienced it. If you're interested in looking up, there's lots of people writing about it. There's Christopher Noel, there's Sunbo True Brother, there's Ron Moorhead. There's lots of people writing about mind speak. And this is a form of communication that's telepathic. And how that works it comes in various different forms. It works, each person is individual. Some people say they get a voice in their head that's not them. It's a completely different voice saying things to them in their head. Some people experience of words, it's like their own mind voice, but they're not their thoughts. It comes in too quickly for them it's not their imagination. It's not something that they've had time to think about. It's words coming straight into their mind. That's what happens to me a lot. I'll get
So,
a
do
sentence.
you have to be around the creature for that to happen, or that just
No,
happens?
they can do that from anywhere. The one I communicate with lives up in Springbrook National Park.
Okay,
So that's a
okay.
long way. It's a long way. Like that's a 2-day drive between there and here, and yet he speaks to me. I asked him a couple of years ago now, what can I do? What can I do for you? You've been talking to me and helping me a lot. How can I help you? And straight into my head, the words came, keep talking about us the way that you do. That they seem to, from what I understand, they're enjoying the fact that I'm talking about them as though they're people, as though they're sentient people. They're not monsters. They're not animals they're not predators who are going to kill. They're not demons. They're not Nephilim. They're people. And I firmly believe that. And the ones I've spoken to are quite happy that someone's out there talking about them in a nice way rather than scaring the crap out of everybody by saying that they're all monsters who want to eat you.
Well, do you think, I mean, a lot of people say, okay, are they dimensional? Are they terrestrial? But are they extraterrestrial? Did they come from another planet, or did they come from here? Or what's your thoughts on where they came from?
I don't know originally where they came from. Sunbow True Brother has some information on that in his books, The Sasquatch Message to Humanity. I haven't learnt personally myself much about that, but I do know that they're interdimensional beings. They can move between dimensions. They can,
Okay. And I've heard a lot of people say that, you know how you said, or I had asked, oh, do you have many people who find them and things like that? Well, a lot of people say they can find you. You
yes.
can just stay and sit and they'll come find you. You don't need to go find them. They'll find you.
One of the messages that my friend Karen I was just telling you about, who saw the Yowie crossing the road, she was actually in my latest show, the one I published this week, and while I was interviewing her, she had a Yowie come in and tell her a message to share with my listeners, and the message was, "Don't come looking for us. It's the wrong energy. When you're searching for us, it's kind of a low vibe, hunting, grasping sort of energy, and it's not that you need to be operating on a higher vibrational frequency in order
Okay.
to connect with
For
us."
to connect with them.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
That makes
go out.
sense.
The advice was, go out and smell the roses, walk around bare feet, feel the energy of the place, uh, get yourself into a state of high vibrational frequency, meaning feel joy, feel gratitude, feel love. Um, Work on yourself, meditate, work on yourself, and they will find you. That was the
Okay.
yeah.
That's interesting. And that's a good message, because I know a lot of people are afraid. And that example that you gave of, somebody seeing one was not a scary thing. But that having been said, I know you've had a lot of interviews. Have you had scary encounters with
Hmm.
anybody?
Yeah, yeah, lots of scary ones. Most people are terrified because they don't know what they're dealing with, and they're seeing something that they've been told, one, doesn't exist, or two,
Right.
is a monster or a demon. And of
And
course,
Sarah,
it can be
I think
terrifying.
I was just gonna say it's similar to ghost hunting, right? Like, you know how you go into a house, if you provoke and you're mean and rude, well, then that person or spirit or whatever is in the house might be mean and rude back to you, right?
Yeah.
So they always say go in with respect. So do you find with people who, let's say, provoke by way too many tree knocks or something, does that piss them off, shall we
Yeah.
say?
Yeah, they don't really like it. They don't No one likes being hunted. So if imagine if you had people coming to, find signs of you and search for you in your own home, it'd be a bit annoying. I remember I've interviewed a couple of people who mentioned they had really scary Yowie experiences after they were using a chainsaw in the bush,
Oh,
chopping trees down.
okay.
Um, One guy who'd actually, he was maybe a young teenager, and he was chopping trees down and making a cubby house in the forest,
Right,
and
right.
got roared at and chased out by
Oh,
a really angry Yowie, and because he was chopping trees down, and the Yowie didn't like that. I've spoken to a couple of people who've had exactly those experiences when
kind
they've
of
been using chainsaws. Yeah,
territorial type of experiences.
yeah. Another guy. And this is a really well-known case here in Australia, the Bellbird Grove case. He was going for a run. It was during the COVID lockdowns here, so there was nobody around. He wasn't even supposed to be out, but he was getting cabin fever and went for a walk and a run.
Right.
And walking through this national park area, Bellbird Grove, it's called, and starts hearing, and he was walking off track. He wasn't walking on any of the tracks. He was just walking through the bush, and heard some rocks being clacked together. And he was like, oh, what's going on there? And he was walking up a dry creek bed, and comes around a bend. All of a sudden, about 50 meters away, sees a juvenile Yowie
Oh,
splashing around in. There was a little bit of water left in the creek, was maybe ankle deep, and this little Yowie was kind of smashing rocks together and splashing the water and having a really good time. The little one spotted this guy and turned around to the bank and made a kissing, like a raspberry noise, a kissing noise. And then all of a sudden, Big Mama or Big Papa
uh-oh.
stepped down from the bank. They were obviously sitting on the creek bank keeping watch, but didn't see this witness coming up the creek bed. And then this big one stomps down into the creek bed and just roars at him. And like, oh my God. He hadn't even heard of Yowies before that. Like
Okay. So
he
he
was a
didn't know what to think or what it
didn't
was.
he turned around and ran for his life, and he honestly thought he was in mortal danger. And he said, I had two phones in my pocket. There was no way I was stopping to take a photo.
No.
No, and it was such a fright that he needed to go and see a doctor and get some medication for a few months to help him get through that experience, because it was that frightening. But if you looking at it from an outsider's point of view, though, basically they weren't trying to harm him. They just wanted to get him away from their baby.
Their
So
baby, yeah, because that's their baby, right? But
yeah.
now, have you had very many, experiences of or examples of people having them come to their house? Because I know sometimes, you hear people where, "Oh, it tried to get in my car, it tried to get in my house."
Yeah. I've spoken to quite a few people who've heard them outside their windows, who've had them slap the sides of their house. I've got a friend in Queensland who had been cooking like corned beef, silver side, in a pot for several hours one afternoon, and so there's meat smells wafting for hours.
Okay.
And he sat down. It was finally ready, and he sat down to eat something and looks up, and there's a Yowie looking in his kitchen window, almost as if to say, "Where's mine?
We're ready for supper, like, "Where's my
Where's
my
my
plate?"
dinner?"
That's
Yeah.
funny. So what
Yeah,
did he
so
do? Did he just, freak
well,
out
this
and run into the other room or what?
no, this particular friend is a very psychic, intuitive person, and he talks to them all the time. So he wasn't
Okay.
frightened, and he kind of it was only there for a couple of seconds, and then it left. So
So
he wasn't too
he
disturbed.
he used, like, the Yowie mind speak then, or
He didn't in that particular instance, but he has many times. He's an energy healer as well. So what's been happening in the last kind of, I don't know, 6 to 12 months is they've been coming to him for help with some of their physical ailments and healing.
Oh,
He was transported astrally fairly recently. They uh, they came to ask him for healing help. One of their women was giving birth and was having issues, and they came to get him, but didn't take him physically, took him astrally, transported him, and he's seeing this in his mind. They took him to where she was,
like
and he
remote viewing kind of thing.
yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
And he directed his energy, his healing energy at her, and helped her get through that birth.
Okay.
He saw in his cupped hands a little bit later, he got a vision of a little Yowie, baby Yowie face.
Ah,
Um,
okay.
yeah, yeah. Whether they were able to project that image into his hands, or that was all third eye stuff. I'm not 100% sure, but they've got the ability to do that. I was with uh, the same group of people, Karen and Mark and my other friend Daryl, who's a shaman, and we were camping together. And one 12-foot Yowie had been
12
hanging.
foot.
12-foot had been hanging around and playing with my dogs, actually,
Oh my
and
gosh.
and he projected his image to all of us at the same time, so we could see. He wasn't standing right in front of us physically, but his outline was projected into all of our minds at the same time, because we could
Wow.
all see
Okay.
exactly the same thing at the same time.
Okay, so
Uh,
everybody saw the same thing.
yep, yep.
Wow.
It wasn't our imagination if we're all seeing exactly the same thing at the same time.
Yeah, that is odd. 100% odd. Right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Wow.
But
Well,
the cool thing is he said to us, and we all got the same message as well at the same time. Thanks for letting my son play with your dogs last night. Like, cool, no worries. My dog was having a ball by the sounds of it.
so your
We didn't.
dog loved it.
Well, I was asleep. We were all asleep, but Mark woke up in the middle of the night and heard my dog running around as though he was playing.
Oh,
We were all
okay.
asleep, so it was really weird. He wasn't barking or growling. He said he could hear sticks and leaves and running, and yeah, it turns out that they were playing with him
They were having
overnight.
a party while you guys were sleeping.
But interestingly also, all of us fell asleep really early that night.
Hmm,
We wanted to stay awake. We were together, we were friends hanging out, having some drinks, and I wanted to stay up late. None of us could, and that's one of the other things that has been reported that Yowies can do, is they could make you sleepy and make you fall asleep, and I've heard multiple reports of that.
huh.
So we think we were all being put to sleep so that Yowie Junior could come and play with the dogs.
But tell
Which
me
is
about
really cool.
the gifts. Now, I've had, Al Santoriga on. I gotta give a shout out to Al, and we gotta give a shout out to, Brent Thomas from
Oh,
Paranormal Portal Podcast. Thanks,
yeah.
Brent, for introducing
Hey,
me to
Brent.
Sarah Bignell. But, yeah, Al Santoriga from New York, from the Bronxville, Paranormal Society. I recently had him on, and we talked about gifting during the Christmas season, actually. But, what kind of stuff, do people gift or vice versa in Australia?
Personally, I'd never gift food. We've been told that they don't really want our food. Probably because there's so much rubbish. There's so many chemicals and sugar and
Okay,
nasty things in the food that we consume,
that
and
makes sense.
pesticides and all that sort of stuff. So they don't want
Okay,
food. But I use marbles and I use crystals like chunks of amethyst, and
okay,
um, I use I've made a few plaits out of my hair from the hair on my hairbrush. I pull it out of my brush and then I make a plait out of it, and that has actually been taken twice. Um,
interesting. Okay.
yeah, yeah. I have a gifting tree here on my farm,
Do
and
you?
I left marbles and two plaits of my hair, and um, it took nothing happened for 6 months, and then all of a sudden it was all gone. So, yeah, and where I had put it, it's highly unlikely that it was a bird or some other creature
That's
that
going to be my next question. I know crows love shiny objects, and sometimes birds use hair for nests and stuff. Could it have been a bird? But like, where did you put it in such a way where a bird couldn't, I guess, see it or get at it?
it could have been a bird, but I put it in. I've got a massive dead tree. It's huge, and there's quite a few little hollows in the tree, and I put it inside the tree, fairly deep in a hollow. And so it was unlikely that a bird was going to get in there. It's not impossible, but my friend Karen, who's psychic, said she had. When I told her about that, she said, "Oh, I'm getting a vision of a hairy hand reaching in and grabbing those." So
Okay.
I
Interesting.
yeah, I couldn't tell you 100% because I didn't see them taking it, but I suspect it was them. I've also found 2 marbles near my home, 2 marbles that like we're on a 100-acre farm, so there's no is it 100? Yeah, 100 acres. And so there's no one else around. And I found 2 marbles right near our home and a chunk of the amethyst that I left out on the tree, which is a couple of 100 meters away from the
Okay.
house. I
So you
found.
think that's them returning it to you?
Yeah, I'll show you one of
Okay.
these. It's fairly heavy for a
Yeah,
bird to pick up.
for
Um,
sure. Yeah, yeah.
I wouldn't have thought it was possible for a bird to pick something like that up. I might be
Hmm.
wrong, but it was moved from
But how could
the
it be smart enough to bring it to your door?
it was brought to my door. So
Yeah.
I don't
Hmm.
know. I don't know.
Does
I think
anybody else know where your hidey hole is for the Bigfoot gifts?
no, only
No?
my
Okay.
husband, and my husband knows not to play tricks on me
I
like
was gonna
that.
say, was your husband messing with you? No, okay.
He knows there would be consequences.
I was just gonna say you'd run after him with a broomstick.
Exactly.
But yeah, because I was gonna ask you, did they gift you anything? So they're kind of like giving it back to you. Maybe do you think that they think you lost it and say, "Hey, did you lose this? Here you go," kind of thing?
I'm not sure, but the 2 marbles that I got weren't marbles that I'd left. They were different marbles.
Oh, they were different marbles.
Yeah, yeah, they were older
Oh.
marbles, not
Oh,
new
that's
ones.
so cool. Because 'cause isn't that what people do with marbles? They trade them.
Yeah, yeah. So they took like 3 or 4 of my marbles and, they left me 2 different ones that were different kinds of marbles. And
Interesting.
I've also I was leaving out, stick patterns,
Yeah.
glyphs, we call them, but, I left one out and I discovered it maybe, I can't remember, maybe a couple of weeks later. Another very thin stick had been woven through the ones that I had left. There's no way.
Really?
Yeah, there's no way the wind could have done that. So
Cool.
I think that was them, communicating as well.
So it was kinda like weaving. That's
Yeah.
something that you had left and something else was woven into it.
Yes.
Wow.
Yep.
Hmm.
Yeah, very
That
cool.
that is really cool.
Yeah.
Wow. You've got a lot of different stories. Are there any other stories that stick out in your mind from a lot of people who you've interviewed?
Well, one of my favorites is,
I think I was gonna ask you one about there was a bushfire or something you wanted to mention, wasn't there?
yeah, yeah. So that same witness, he's seen, yowies twice. Both sightings were remarkable. One of them was the bushfire one, and he was at the time, he is a helicopter pilot, and he was working as a fire bomber. And there was a huge bushfire here a few years ago, and he was, trying to get on top of a fire that was coming up a ridge in the mountains,
Right.
and he looked down. He was about to drop the load onto the fire, and he looked down and he realized at first he could see a group of people running across the mountain ridge, and he initially thought, "Oh, there's people down on the people down on the mountaintop. What are they doing there? I didn't think anyone was there. And then he takes a second look and realizes that what he's looking at are not people, but hairy beings. And there were at least 5, and they were running from the fire front.
Oh my gosh, what a scene.
Yeah. So he drops the load onto the fire, and then
This was in Falls Creek, right?
That was his first one, and I'll tell you about that one in a sec. This one was actually near Marigal in New South Wales.
Oh.
And this was like this, and this only happened to him. It was the summer of 2019, 2020. And so he goes down to a dam where he's picking up water for the helicopter, and he's getting another load and jumps out to go to the toilet, and getting back into the helicopter, looks up and realizes there's 2 tall Yowies looking at him, just observing him going to the toilet and getting more water for the helicopter, the next load.
Okay.
So I don't know, and he wasn't sure if the 2 that he saw were 2 of the ones that were up on the mountain ridge. It was feasible for them to have made it down the mountain to where the dam was. But very interesting. I thought it was a really interesting story, because people are often asked, what happens during fires? Like,
right.
Can they disappear? Can they become invisible? Can they slip between dimensions and get out of there? I have learnt from them, and I've heard this from other people who communicate with Sasquatch in the States as well, that they're not born knowing how to disappear. They're not born knowing how to slip into another dimension. They need to be taught that. And so their babies can't do it. And so they're vulnerable. Until they can learn how to do that, they're vulnerable.
Okay.
And so
that makes complete sense, right?
Right. So I wondered if in situations like that, if you've got young ones who haven't learned how to do that yet.
What happens? Yeah.
What happens? And so in this case, they were running away from the fire. But the thing that happened to the same gentleman when he was a young man, he was an electricity linesman, and at Falls Creek in Victoria, which is high country, mountain, snow-capped
mountain. Okay.
And there'd been a big storm, and the power lines were down. And so he was out repairing them. It was about 7 a.m. in the morning. It was daylight. And he's up a power pole, up a structure, doing what linesmen do,
right.
getting the power back on. And he realizes from up at his vantage point that on two ridges away, he can see 3 hairy beings. Huge. One looked like a male, and he estimated that male to be about 2.9 meters tall, which is not 9.5, 10 feet tall.
Okay.
And he described that being as jet black, but with a sheen to it like a crow has. You know how they have that?
Oh yeah.
Glistening sheen to them.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a big male. There's a female who's a bit shorter than the male, and he did describe the male as being huge and muscular and V-shaped, but with a little bit of a pot belly, bit like, so he had a bit of a dad bod as well.
Dad bod.
He was athletic with a bit of a dad bod,
right?
And then there was the female who had breasts. He could see was covered in hair, but he could see the breasts, and she wasn't quite as V-shaped as the big male. And then there was another one who was slightly shorter than the female, and he described that one as looking like the male but just a small version. So we think family group, mum, dad and junior teenage boy perhaps, and they were making their way through the edge of the forest line, the edge of the tree line there, and making their way up onto an easement on the top of the ridge line, and he could see them very clearly. They couldn't see him to start with, but he did, and then they kind of disappeared from view, and he thought, oh God, maybe I need to get down from here and get away. And then he climbs down from the structure and then looks over to the other ridge, and the male has popped up on the next ridge and is sniffing the air so he thought, oh my God, he knows I'm here somehow.
Trying to find them, yeah.
Yeah, trying to find him because he could smell him by that stage. And then the big one's eyes lock on this guy, and he's like,
He's like,
shit.
what do I do?
What do I
Right?
do? And all sorts of emotions were going through his mind. He was really frightened. He was like, what am I looking at? What's going on? The Yowie, all of a sudden, this man said he felt a wave of calmness and safety. And it was like he was being told, don't worry, you're safe. We're not going to hurt you. You're fine. And he described it like a wave of emotion that hit him, that wasn't coming from him internally. It was coming externally and hit him with that. And all of a sudden he was like, oh, okay, I'm all right.
Like
and
positivity instead of fear, it was like positive.
Exactly. Which correlates with what my friend Karen experienced a couple of months ago with the wave of love and calm. This guy felt a wave of calm and safety. Other people have felt waves of fear and dread. And get out of here now, you're in danger. So they seem to have this ability to transmit emotion and physical feelings to human beings. Quite an amazing skill to have.
Yeah.
So
this, and in the end, the Yowie mind speak again, right?
Well, yeah.
Yeah. Well, what about orbs? I know that there's a lot of talk of drones all over the place, and like when people see Bigfoot in Australia, do they report sights of orbs with them also?
Yeah, they do. I'll tell you a story that happened here on the farm last April. I had my little team gathered here. My husband and I got married here on the farm.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Yeah, it was lovely. It was beautiful. But we had Yowies around us, which was really cool. And so my friend Daryl, the night after the wedding, it was about 11 p.m. that night, looking, and there's nothing out here. We're in farmland. It's a huge farm. There's nothing around. He sees a big bright white light very low to the ground, not too far away from him. And he was like, oh, is that a min light or is it a car light? Like, what is that? And he thought he waved at it and it flashed at him. And he thought, oh, okay, maybe it's a min light, which is what we call orbs. It's one of the names we call.
I was going to ask you that min light. Okay,
it's a min light. Yeah, that's an original Australian word, and the words came into his head while he's looking at this light that flashes at him. He will come to you tonight. Go to bed. We'll wake you up. He'll come to you tonight. So it's kind of communicating at him, and he waved at it again to say, yeah, I got the message, and it flashed back at him. So he went to bed. Everyone was camping. So he went into his tent, went to bed, wakes up wide awake at 2:02 a.m. and thought, okay, I'll get out of the tent, and walks out, and there is a ginormous 15-foot Yowie standing in front of him in the dark. He could see 15 foot. Like you can't even. I find it hard to even imagine a being that tall. Wow. And of course, with the corresponding wideness and girth and depth to go with that. And in fact, that Yowie told Daryl he was even bobbing down a bit so that he didn't appear quite as tall. So it was just ginormous being. Daryl also, like Karen, went into a bit of shock and was like, and almost went blind in fear. Now, this guy, he's a shaman. He works in the spirit world. He's been speaking to Yowies for the last couple of years. Even that experience that he had, and he knew they didn't mean him any harm, just the fact that he was standing in front of a being that large that could kill him like that was so terrifying that he
was in shock.
He was in shock. Mm. He said he turned around and put his back to him and just said, just give me a minute and just give me a minute, and turned around to look at the stars, to kind of go, just calm down a little bit.
He put his back to it. All right.
He put his back to it, going, I just need a minute. Looked up at the stars, kind of gathered his thoughts a bit, and then turned back around again. And he said, I couldn't stand there, Sarah.
When he turned back around, was it still there?
It was still there. It was still there. And he said, I stood there for a minute, and he said, I ended up saying, I've got to go back to bed. I can't do it.
I can't process this right now. Goodbye, right?
He went back to bed. He's really annoyed now because he's like, oh my God, I had this perfect opportunity to kind of stand there and have him right in front of me and talk. He said, but my nervous system took over, and I had to go back to bed. He then did find the next day a little red Japanese maple leaf. Now, there are no Japanese maple trees around here, and certainly not red. It wasn't. It was the beginning of autumn, but the leaves on other trees weren't red, and it's not a native tree to Australia, and there were no trees with those leaves on them anywhere in the nearby vicinity.
Weird. So, and this was like right outside the tent?
Right outside his tent. And something that we've discovered is that when they touch things, they leave a vibrational residue, like a frequency residue. And you can, if you hold your hand above something that they've touched, the palm of your hand heats up. And I've done this. They taught me how to do this, and it works 100%. So this little leaf, you could feel the frequency on it. So we're thinking it's this Yowie has managed to get that leaf from God knows where, and it was still fresh, and bring it to the farm and leave it outside Daryl's tent as a present. And he's still got that red leaf. He took it back to where he lives in Sweden, and it still has the frequency. It's still the palm of his hand still heats up when he holds it over.
No way. Are you serious?
Yeah.
Wow.
I've actually got a rock that I brought back from my last trip to Queensland.
Yeah.
That I was told that I was allowed to take the rock. We had gone on this massive hike down this dry ravine. It was a 4.5-hour trek. It was absolutely amazing in basically jungle. And I found this stack of rocks that was kind of unusual, and I picked one up and I could feel the residue on it. And my friend Mark, who talks to them very easily, said, oh, I just got told that you can take that rock if you want, Sarah, and then you'll be able to connect with the Yowie who left it there. That rock still has the frequency, and that was a couple of months ago. I have it not here in the studio. I've got it in my home, but I picked it up the other day. It's still got a frequency.
Really?
The palm of my hand heats up. It's freaky but it works. It's really cool. So if maybe some of your listeners could try that if they find something.
Yeah, if you can leave some comments in the chat down there for Sarah, if you've ever had that happen with you, or different frequencies and feeling the heat from something that they've touched, because I know lots of people do gifting and stuff here in North America. So let Sarah know if you're listening from anywhere else in the world, in the UK or anywhere else, let us know. Sarah, do you want to give a shout out where people can find you and all your work?
Yeah, so Yowie Central is on all the major podcast platforms, Spotify, iTunes, all the major platforms. I'm not on YouTube as yet. I am working on getting video format happening for my interviews, but it hasn't happened yet. So yeah, basically all the major podcast platforms. You can also find many of my interviews on the Australian Yowie Research YouTube channel, and my voice is there voicing some of the interviews that are the background for the videos that they made. So that's where you can find me.
All right. Well, I'm going to give a quick station ID and then I'll be right back. And again, folks, you are listening to 105.3 FM in New Orleans. And you're also listening to 107.7 FM New Orleans and UPRN, United Public Radio Network. Make sure you tune in and follow them on all of their stations. Let's get back now to Sarah. Do you want to give a shout out, Sarah, to all your fans?
Oh, yes. I want to say a huge thank you to all of my beautiful listeners. You know, I get so many lovely messages from people who say, thank you for doing what you do. That particular episode made me feel like that I wasn't going crazy because I've had similar stuff happening to me. And particularly with the Mind Speak, when I started talking about my own Mind Speak stuff, I had people reaching out from around the country saying, oh, my God, I'm so glad you've started talking about this. I thought I was going crazy and now I know I'm not. So I really want to say thank you to all of those people who send me messages of love and support. I'm really grateful to all my listeners out there. So grateful to you for giving me your attention and your energy. It's really special. And especially to all of my guests. They're the best. There wouldn't be a Yowie Central without all the lovely people who come on and share their stories. So, yeah.
Well, everybody, make sure you follow Sarah Bignell on all of her different platforms. And also check out Paranormal NL Podcast on all of our link trees. And Sarah, you still got time to share another quick story if you have time in under a couple minutes or less.
Okay, let me think of one. So this lady, this woman I spoke to just the other day was telling me a story when she was about 12, driving at night with her brother. Her brother was driving through a forest area on a dirt track, and she was every now and then putting her flashlight on and looking out the window as they were driving through the forest. And suddenly she sees what appeared to be approximately 8-foot hairy being running alongside of the car, staring in the window at her.
Alongside the car?
Running alongside the car.
Wow.
She said it was only about 1.5 meters away. So maybe, I don't know, about 6 foot away from her. She could see it really clearly. Amber eyes, totally hair-covered face, which is different. Some people report seeing faces that are not completely hair-covered. This one was totally hair-covered, but she could see big amber eyes, and it was running alongside of the car looking at her. There was another one I did, an interview that I did a few years ago now, but a woman who described something very similar. She was driving at about 90 kilometres an hour, which is maybe, I don't know, in miles for you guys.
We use kilometers here in Newfoundland and Labrador, yeah.
Clicks. Oh, yeah, you would up there too. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So 90 clicks an hour.
Yeah.
And this being, she thought she saw something coming up behind her and running, and it was running on all fours to start with. And she thought, it's a very, very bloody fast cow or horse. And
something's going,
on her, and then all of a sudden it rears up onto 2 legs, still running, and looks in the window at her. She had a little dog in the car that was going bananas. This dog was terrified, and the car filled with this terrible stench, which is something that's often reported here with Yowies and probably with the Sasquatch there in North America.
They are.
Yeah. So, but I can only imagine the terror at driving along the road and having
something on all fours get up and then run on all twos. It's like,
and then looking in the window at you, and then it jumped over the car onto the other side of the road and ran off into the forest.
Wow.
Yeah. So there are a few reports of them running alongside cars, and I suspect it's more of a young cheeky
Yeah.
Yowie
Young
behavior.
Cheeky Yowie. Thanks again for
Yeah.
talking to us from Yowie Central.
My
Everybody
pleasure.
follow Sarah. We're going to peace out now.